Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing Bigfoot stories. Let's get into it. Story 1. This story is told by Joel White and occurred in 1984. My story of Bigfoot was not visual, but rather we heard a scream in the deep forest that we could not explain. The location was in the area of Mono Hot Springs, in the Sierra Nevadas in California, specifically the Ansel Adams Wilderness. My brother, a friend, and I were fishing at Doris Lake near dusk. Doris Lake is roughly a mile-and-a-half hike from the resort of Mono. Nothing unusual was happening, and then out of nowhere, we heard a scream come from across the lake up in the mountains. There were no people or animals that we could see anywhere. We were in the proverbial wilderness. My brother and I looked at each other, and unable to readily discern what we heard, we continued to fish. I did say to him, "If I hear that again, I'm out of here." Well, a minute or so later, the same scream. The three of us immediately reeled in and began to run all the way back to the resort without stopping. I have listened to various recordings of alleged Bigfoot, and I am struck by how similar these recordings are to the scream that we heard. I did not see anything, so I can't be sure, but I am fairly certain that what we heard was not a human, bear, or a mountain lion. So what could it be? Note, my brother and sister worked for several years at Mono Hot Springs. My sister's good friend who worked there as well had a horse, which she kept in the summertime at the springs. While riding in the back country, she claims to have seen Bigfoot walking through a meadow below a bluff where she was riding atop. The area was a mountain lake surrounded by deep forest and mountains. I would like to take a moment to point out that a majority of my viewers are not subscribed. If you could be so kind as to subscribe, click like, leave a comment, maybe even share the video, it will go a long way in helping me get recommended. And if you would like to join my Patreon, you'll find a link in the description below. For $5 a month, you'll have access to all my content before it goes to YouTube. That goes for stories and my newest edition, short episodes of my mini haunting series. Now, let's get back to the stories. Story 2. This story is told by Ben Foster. In 1968, we were logging just out of Hayfork, California, and on the weekends a group from the Bay Area would come up to hunt old Bigfoot. One weekend we camped at Stewart Gap near Platina. There were 16 of us. We had finished dinner after a long day's hunt, and were just sitting around discussing the next day's plans when a couple dropped by riding horses, heading to a small lake about 4 miles north of us. Around 9 p.m. we heard something coming down the trail. It was the horses running wild through the forest, but no riders. We decided to wait till daylight and go look for them. The lake was in a no vehicle allowed area. You had to hike or ride a horse in about 3 miles from where you left your horses in the Forest Service corral. Later that night, about 1 a.m., we were awakened by these loud screams of something not like any animal I've ever heard in that part of the woods. We lit a fire and sat waiting, hoping to see what was making all that noise. So just past daylight, we crossed the road and a small creek looking for signs. What we found was about 160 tracks, each 21 inches long by 7 inches wide, and part of a fresh-killed deer. It appeared to have been ambushed, with one creature standing behind a large yellow pine on a deer trail, and the other creature following behind it. It appeared the one creature behind the tree just stepped out and grabbed the deer. Most of this doe was taken, but the head to just behind the front shoulders was all that was left. It looked as if it had been ripped in two. The spinal cord was twisted. As for the horses, 2 years later a Forest Service ranger found their carcasses, or part of them, stuck in a rock outcropping 7 miles from our camp. The couple walked out unhurt that same night or the next morning, but terrified, and claimed 2 huge, hairy, stinky creatures tried to ambush them. The horses threw them off and ran. As I said, they weren't hurt, but just scared to death. They had holed up in some rocks and waited the night out. Story 3. This story is told by Sally and Neil De La Fuentes. It took place on July 4th, 2012 in Morgan County, Ohio. My husband and I just spent July 3rd through the 7th camping in southeastern Ohio at a private lake, which we prefer not to name. On the night of July 4th, around 11:30 p.m., we were on the private lake, which borders the west side of a stretch of power lines. One of our friends in a kayak smelled a strong musk skunk odor from the west side of the lake. The wind was blowing to the east. At the same time we heard crashing branches like something running through the woods over on the east side of camp on the other side of the power lines. She brought the kayak back to shore, and then her boyfriend took the kayak out to the deepest end of the lake. All of a sudden a huge rock about the size of a full-grown German shepherd flew across the road, which runs all the way around the lake, over the bank, over the grass line, and into the lake. This was about 20 yards from the kayak. Then our friend in the kayak antagonized it, really just trying to scare it away by pounding his paddle on his kayak and yelling, "Hey, you big ape!" Then the grass man threw a second rock, even bigger than the first. It landed a lot closer, within 10 yards of the kayak. The three of us on the bank were approximately 100 yards from the creature, and our friend in the kayak was about 30 yards. We all saw the creature. He was peeking out from behind a tree. He rocked his body back and forth from one side of the tree to the other, then he moved to the water line and back. At that point my husband set off 3 bottle rockets, thinking it would scare the grass man off. He then loaded his 12-gauge shotgun. He didn't want to harm or make it mad, just didn't want it to get any closer. The creature seemed to stand about 4.5 to 5 feet tall and didn't seem to have a neck. He may have been a juvenile, or he was crouching down. He looked very thick in the chest, thick torso, broad shoulders, and glowing dark yellow eyes. He was light to medium brown, the color of the tree bark. We had our really bright mag light with new batteries pointing right at him. We thought we heard another one just south of us, possibly calling the creature with a whoop sound. Then our grass man disappeared to the south. We think there were 2 adults around the outside of the camp, and what we encountered was a juvenile. We were all so excited from our encounter that we stayed up until about daylight. The whole time we were there, before and after the encounter, we heard a baby crying, a woman screaming, and even heavy breathing at different times. My husband also heard strange whistles, whooping sounds, and even a tree fell over in the woods on the other side of the lake. We all heard that. In years past, at this same camp, we've heard things and smelled things, but never had the encounter we had this year. What a rush. My husband believes they used the power lines as a trail. We truly believe there was more than one grassman out there around our camp this year. It was a full moon that night, so he possibly could have been a darker color, but his hair was shiny from the moon glow and flashlight. This is true to the best of our account. It's changed the way we think about going into the woods for the rest of our lives. Story 4. This story is from the files of the late Bobby Ann Slate, Bigfoot investigator. It was a routine night at Edwards Air Force Base, California, Air Security Police Desk, until the frantic call came in from the patrol on duty at the restricted site known as Project Logic. The man's voice was urgent and high-pitched with fear. "Send a patrol quick. There's this huge form coming toward me. Hurry." His voice trailed off and the sounds of gunshots could be heard through the receiver. Then there was nothing but an ominous silence. When the patrol arrived, the guard was found in a dazed, incoherent state after having fired the full magazine in his gun. The Office of Special Investigation was called in. According to one military source, the patrol vehicle was found overturned, the patrolman's rifle snapped in two, and huge 5-toed bare human-like footprints crisscrossed the site. The patrolman had not been injured, but was terrified. While no official report of this incident can be found in the archives of the base's historical department, the rumor circulated throughout the Air Force Police that the man at Project Logic was deeply affected by his encounter of that night. They said he was placed in a military hospital and eventually sent to an overseas base. In the spring of 1974, Edwards Air Force Base security policeman Sergeant Michael House was on night patrol on the outskirts of the powerful communication site known as Mars Station, which maintains radio contact with other military installations around the globe. A nearby microwave tower, looming like a lonely sentinel in the darkness, stood surrounded by a wooden fence posted with signs advising that explosive devices, electronically operated or magnetically charged, would detonate within a certain radius. Sergeant House was patrolling in the area of the abandoned sled track once used for testing G-forces when he saw it. "I'd gotten a new spotlight and was trying it out," the sergeant said. "Heading back to the main base, I noticed maybe 200-300 yards to my left these large blue eyes. I do a lot of night hunting, and it was strange. They were larger than anything I'd ever seen before. Their diameter had to be about 4 inches apart and 7 feet off the ground. I stopped the truck and sat there watching them. It was too dark to see any body shape to the thing. The blue glows proceeded toward my truck at the right angle for about 100 yards and then stopped. The hair bristled in the back of the patrolman's neck as the larger than human eyes began circling and again moving closer to his vehicle. A rank smell like nothing he had ever smelled before, something rotten, permeated the air. The thing moved closer again, now coming within 50 yards of the truck, but still its shape could not be discerned through the brush in the desert. Just at that moment, the truck radio advised Sergeant House that he should proceed directly back to the main base, and he quickly left the area. He returned 3 hours later, but there was no trace of the blue eyes. Rain washed out the possibility of locating any tracks the following day. The movement of the eyes was extremely fast, Sergeant House recalled. Another thing that bothered me was that they didn't bob up and down. It was like two lights on a wire moving from one point to another. He was ribbed a good deal while making out his official report on the incident, which was set to the standard of non-reporting from other patrols that encountered strange things in subsequent months. The commanding officer wanted to believe his men were simply over-imaginative. After all, the desert could produce some eerie effects at night, and then, too, reports of fantastic creatures in and around restricted areas didn't look good in the official log. "You're only hearing the wind," he told the men staffing the Mars station on the midnight shift, who said they'd been hearing some unusual sounds as well as seeing a dark form of something walk past a building, a figure which had to have been almost 8 feet tall to be seen through the high windows, something which stepped on and pulverized glass soda pop bottle in its path. In several instances, calls to the air police about creatures moving in the desert did turn out to be wild burros moving silently through the sage at night. While their eyes are blue, there is almost no reflection due to limited pigmentation. If there were official investigations by the OSI, the men on patrol seldom heard the outcome unless there were some natural explanation. Thus, they wondered about the rumor circulating that 3 men on duty at a complex near the bombing range had called in for help. As the story went, when the patrol arrived, they found the security guards unconscious. The door leading into the building was ripped off its hinges, and sophisticated electronic equipment within had been demolished. Just a tale? It was told to an air policeman by a member of the patrol investigating that call for help. The Rocket Propulsion Lab lies on the eastern edge of Edwards Air Force Base and utilizes a vast area of the facility. It contains installations ranging from gigantic multi-million-pound thrust rocket stands to smaller, highly specialized test equipment which can capture and instantaneously analyze the exhaust gas produced by a rocket engine. It is here that rockets and similar hardware are tested for the study of propulsion equipment under conditions of long-term exposure to the environment. It is also here that weapons systems are developed and tested. Certain areas are off limits to civilians, and signs warn to keep out of the potentially toxic areas. Air Police Sergeant Barton had an open mind about creatures. His relatives in Missouri had seen and shot at the mammoth Bigfoot-like monster known as Momo, and though he trusted their accounts of the incident, he also realized the doubt and ridicule they were subject to when he talked about it. As a result, no formal report was made to the Air Security Police concerning what happened in the winter of 1974, while Barton was on patrol in the vicinity of the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory and the strange blue lights he saw in the nearby mountains. Assuming the lights to be from a car, Barton drove towards them in order to intercept any unauthorized passengers. The lights vanished when he arrived at the site where he had last seen them, but now he found his vehicle mired in the soft desert sand. Walking approximately 2 miles back to his base, the sergeant intercepted a patrol and they radioed for a tow truck. When the truck arrived and everyone returned to the sergeant's vehicle, they found 3 towed tracks measuring 14 inches long with what appeared to be a clawed digit at the heel. The wind was blowing soft sand and the footprints were filling in rapidly, making any precise identifications difficult. But whatever it was had completely circled the truck as if inspecting it and then walked off on 2 legs into the desert. 3 weeks later, and also on patrol, Air Patrol Sergeant Jones was parked in the region of the rocket site. It was close to midnight. The moon was up when suddenly Jones noticed a shape moving across the skyline of a nearby hill. While he couldn't estimate its height, the trunk area of girth was described as immense. The sergeant quickly grabbed his radio microphone and called HQ. "Tell the replacement to hurry up. I might need some help," he urged. As Jones looked back again to the hill, two large luminescent green-blue orbs, like eyes, were moving towards him. "They didn't really seem to me like they were bouncing away a person would when they're walking," he said. "They kind of floated, or were moving on an easy glide." Car lights appeared down the road, and the patrolman lost no time in getting out of his truck and walking to meet the vehicle. At that moment he was extremely grateful that the men had responded so quickly to his call for help, but that wasn't actually so. The other vehicle had been ordered into the area in response to a report about strange lights being observed in the hills. Yet no unauthorized cars had been located, and now the glowing eyes had disappeared. All that remained in the vicinity were unusual marks on the ground. The two rounded depressions measured 6 inches and 2 inches in diameter respectively. There were foot tracks as well. "They were all over the place," Jones said. "There were so many of them I couldn't follow any one trail." Barton, who had found tracks around his truck a few weeks earlier, said they were similar to what he had seen. The other man along on the patrol didn't get out of the car. He said he didn't want anything to do with it. Can anyone blame him? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.